Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, proud to support the mission of KPBS and privileged to serve San Diego clients. Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, helping homeowners maintain drain, heating, and cooling systems since 1978. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. It's Monday, September 7th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. For a third straight day, CAL FIRE is throwing everything it has at a wildfire burning near Alpine. The Valley Fire has burned more than 10,000 acres, homes, and structures in and around the Cleveland National Forest. The weather cooled a bit today, but Santa Ana winds are expected, making this a critical day to make progress. In a moment, we will get an update on efforts to help evacuees. But first, our coverage starts with KPBS reporter Max Rivlin-Nadler, who is live at CAL FIRE headquarters tonight with an update. Max.
For the third day, firefighters are battling this growing blaze here in East County. Today's efforts focused on Lyons Road, east of Hamul. The fire is still just 1% contained as of this morning. Firefighters driving earth movers as well as on foot made their way into the scorched hills, but the quickly moving fire tore easily through the dry brush. A DC-10 from the National Guard was called in to continue spraying the fire, as acres and acres were reduced to ash. Several hundred firefighters from all over the San Diego region and some from Orange County have joined the effort. They're being assisted by that DC-10, as well as 14 helicopters and 8 air tankers. The Valley Fire has burned more than 10,000 acres and destroyed at least 11 structures since it started on Saturday afternoon. Residents from several surrounding communities, including Coral Canyon and the Bobcat Meadows area, have been ordered to evacuate. And Cleveland National Forest is closing right at this hour to keep people out of harm's way. With temperatures still high and Santa Ana winds in the forecast, the task ahead of these firefighters remains daunting. CAL FIRE says they'll be issuing an update at around 7 p.m. tonight about the percent of fire that's been contained and the amount of acreage burned. Maya?
Max, how are the firefighters tackling this? What are some of the tactics that you've seen today?
Yeah, so it's in a really rugged area. It's very tough to get at. There's not many roads that go up the side of these mountains. So what I've seen is firefighters tackling this on foot, going up the side of mountains, along with earth movers, really heavy machinery going at really daunting kind of angles. You're seeing some incredible work by these firefighters. I saw a chain of hoses that went up the side of a mountain, demarcating exactly the area that had burned. So a lot of teamwork here. Obviously, people are working a lot of long hours in extremely hot conditions. I know my car thermometer read at around 102 degrees, and then, of course, I wasn't even dealing with the blazes themselves. So I think it's a lot of hard work that's going into this, and with really, really tough conditions.
Okay, thanks, Max. We'll check back with you later in the newscast. And with homes and structures already lost, there are more that remain threatened. That's why some people and their animals have been told to get out. But COVID-19 is complicating an already stressful situation. KPBS reporter Joe Hong spent the day at one of the evacuation centers.
Since Saturday, the Red Cross volunteers at the evacuation center in Joan McQueen Middle School's gymnasium served hot meals and water to nearly 90 evacuees. But the pandemic has complicated nearly all aspects of these relief efforts. Volunteer nurses are conducting temperature checks and health screenings before evacuees enter the gymnasium. Masks are also required inside.
We want to make sure that people know we have really strict protocols.
Andrea Fuller is a volunteer public information officer at the Red Cross.
Our volunteer staff and paid staff are trained to make sure that we help people stay safe, health-wise, COVID, as well as get the relief and support that they need.
The Red Cross partnered with local hotels and motels to provide overnight shelter for those escaping the Valley Fire. It has also teamed up with the Humane Society to find shelters for pets and larger animals. Danielle Beliveau is an Alpine resident who fled her home with her pets on Saturday afternoon.
I got my trailer out, got the dogs in the truck, almost forgot the cat, got the cat in, grabbed food, and then prayed that the horses would load, because at this point the flames were right in my backyard. And they basically surrounded us.
With even more evacuations announced today and with the Valley Fire only contained at about 1%, the Red Cross expects more evacuees in the coming days. Joe Hong, KPBS News.
And thankfully, we haven't seen the same level of destruction to homes as past years, but this wildfire season is already a record breaker in terms of sheer size. CAL FIRE says more than 2 million acres have already burned, and there's still plenty of time on the calendar with fire season lasting through November. We are also getting a look at California's smoky skies courtesy of NASA. Satellite images show the scope of the current fires. The wind is expected to pick up this week, adding another layer to these dangerous conditions. Mark Mancuso has your forecast.
Well, it looks like we're getting a little relief from the heat, but we still have these dry conditions, and we're still concerned about the Valley Fire, which continues to grow. Unfortunately, winds will be on the increase late Tuesday and into Wednesday, a Santa Ana event. And with the dry conditions and these strong winds, that will certainly not help firefighting efforts. Checking on the fire threat, it's really ramping up here with the dry conditions and the winds expected to strengthen late Tuesday into Wednesday. Fire weather watches are in effect. There's some red flag warnings as well. Let's give you an update here on the Valley Fire in East San Diego County. Started over the weekend. Acres burned, over 10,000, only 1% contained. Already 11 structures destroyed. The Navy 3rd Fleet and 1st Marine, they're going to be utilizing military aircraft to help out. Of course, mandatory evacuations in place and poor air quality around the fire. Forecast tonight, well, we are looking at clouds returning to the coast, interior sections. Looking at clear skies, cooling to the upper 60s in San Diego. For tomorrow, the winds will really start to ramp up later in the day and overnight as the Santa Ana starts to return. Some morning clouds to the coast and then some sunshine heating up to 93 in Ramona and El Cajon, so certainly not as hot as what we have seen. And then on Wednesday, very windy here, especially in the morning hours, and there'll be some cooling coming into the deserts and the mountains, but it'll warm up a little bit closer to the coast and in the valley. So temperatures here will hold in the mid-80s next couple of days. Perhaps a little bit of warming showing up towards the weekend. Notice interior valleys here, it gets a little warmer with those winds increasing, and then temperatures will back off a bit for the weekend. Here in the mountains, cooling off. We'll be in the lower 70s Wednesday and Thursday, and in the deserts, it looks like not as hot as some cooling comes in, but then it warms up for the weekend. And for KPBS News, I'm meteorologist Mark Mancuso.
A lot of people made the trip to Las Vegas this holiday weekend, and this is what followed them. Smoke from the fires in California blew into town, creating a smoky haze over the famous skyline. That worsened the air quality in a city already dealing with an excessive heat warning. And we'll have more on the fires burning near Alpine and elsewhere in California later in the newscast. Updates are also available at kpbs.org, where you can read all of our stories and listen to our KPBS podcasts. The COVID-19 situation at SDSU is accelerating, with even more cases popping up over the holiday weekend. County public health officials now say there are nearly 300 confirmed or probable cases since late August, when classes resumed for fall semester. The university has taken major steps to slow the spread. A stay-at-home order is in effect for students through Tuesday morning. Those who violate the order face disciplinary action. Last week, a month-long pause was put in place for in-person classes, shifting all instruction to remote learning. With empty gear cases in tow, event workers took to the streets of San Diego on Labor Day to bring awareness to the impact the pandemic has brought to the events industry. KPBS reporter Tanya Thorne tells us the story.
As businesses begin to reopen at limited capacities, the events industry is one that has been devastated from the beginning of the pandemic, with no foreseeable date to reopen.
We'll be getting started maybe 10 minutes.
Workers marched today from Waterfront Park to the San Diego Convention Center with empty gear cases symbolizing the void of events this year. Bans on mass gatherings have left over 12 million workers in the U.S. unemployed, 200,000 event workers here locally in San Diego. Frank Nshemi, owner of Pacific Creative Productions, tells us how the bans due to COVID-19 have impacted the events industry.
People are losing their businesses. I have friends and colleagues of mine who've either closed down, lost their jobs, and on top of that, they've lost their health care. They're in trouble with their bills. They could either be foreclosed on or kicked out of their apartments. So it's a very scary time right now for people in our industry.
The San Diego Events Coalition, along with industry professionals, are pushing for relief for the thousands of unemployed event workers in order to keep the industry alive. They are requesting an updated paycheck protection program allowing for a second round of funding with consideration for the events industry, an extension on additional unemployment benefits, and a roadmap to safely reopen events. Nshemi knows that following the COVID-19 outbreak, the events industry will look different in the future.
Well, obviously social distancing, obviously wash stations where you can get, hand sanitizers or cleaning.
This is one of a series of demonstrations the San Diego Event Coalition has supported in an effort to advocate for the events industry and its displaced workers. Tanya Thorne, KPBS News.
Up and down the coast today, local beaches are busy. The high heat and the reopening of businesses and restaurants helped lead to the large crowds. This is how Ocean Beach looked this afternoon, although it was a nice way to escape the triple-digit inland temps. Health officials are concerned about another possible spike following a holiday weekend, like we saw on Memorial Day and on July 4th. Officials say we should know within a week if the overcrowding leads to an increase in cases. And the COVID-19 pandemic is putting a lot of pressure on places you might not imagine, places like tide pools. KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson says the shoreline habitats run the risk of being overrun.
Corey Puccini stands just behind Dyke Rock, north of Scripps Pier. He's pointing out the area's tide pools.
If you look around, you'll see a lot of these small fish and invertebrate species that move in and out with the tides.
Puccini is the California Conservation Manager for the environmental group Wild Coast. He worries about the small pocket habitats scattered along the San Diego coast because they're getting a lot of attention from visitors.
Visitation necessarily isn't a bad thing, but over-loving these areas and too many people coming to tide pools and taking critters and removing things, poking and prodding, is not a sustainable way to engage with our tide pools.
Puccini says more people are visiting the fragile habitats because they're looking for safe activities during the pandemic, and he urges them to visit with their eyes. He says it wouldn't take very long to strip away the tide pool's living organisms.
It would take a long time to recover. They would eventually, if left alone, repopulate, but it's going to take a long time on the decade scale.
Puccini says tide pools can be found at Swami's in Encinitas, Point Loma, and Carlsbad, among other places. He wants people to enjoy nearshore habitat. Puccini just doesn't want to see them loved to death. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
Well, their fans can't watch them play in person due to COVID-19, but the Padres are well on track for a trip to the playoffs after another winning weekend. The Padres won 2 out of 3 games in Oakland. Sunday's win was thanks to another home run by Fernando Tatis Jr., who is tied for the most in Major League Baseball. There's about 3 weeks left in the season before an expanded playoff format begins. Tonight, the Padres will host the Colorado Rockies at Petco Park. COVID-19 shut down the film industry, but the city of San Diego's film office recently reopened with new guidelines for working in the pandemic. KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando looks at what's being done to get films rolling again.
Making movies often requires people to work in close quarters, so filmmakers like Fernando J. Huerto have faced challenges trying to shoot during COVID-19. In June, the San Diego Film Office reopened with new guidelines for shooting. Brandy Shimabukuro is the city's filming program manager.
Production does look different these days. We are only allowing right now smaller productions of cast and crew counts of 15 or less, while we have been hearing from larger productions that are interested in filming later in the year. The bulk of what we have been seeing filming on location in San Diego has been smaller commercial shoots, documentaries, docuseries, and what production ultimately looks like is you're taking an industry that thrives on close contact and in-person meetups because you're filming on location. Typically, cast and crew counts would be far larger than your typical threshold of 15. So a lot of productions are utilizing what's called zones, where there's minimal mixing. Physical distancing, of course, is required. Masks for people who are on location is also a requirement, with the exception being for talent who are actively being filmed in front of the camera.
In addition to dealing with the challenges of the pandemic, Shimabukuro has been working on an interactive tool to help filmmakers find locations in San Diego.
What this tool is, and we're calling it the San Diego Filming Jurisdiction Map. It's an interactive map that's available online. It's free and open to the public to access, and we have it linked on sdfilm.org on our website. But when you open it up, if a production has a list of locations and they aren't sure who they need to work with, this map will ultimately point them in the direction so that they know who they would need to reach out to, the film permitting information or the contact information for whomever that agency is.
Shimabukuro hopes this map will assist productions of any size or budget as film work slowly increases in San Diego. Beth Accomando, KPBS News.
I'm Amna Nawaz. Tonight on the NewsHour, California burning. Record-breaking temperatures complicate efforts to control multiple fires across the state. That's coming up at 7 right after Evening Edition on KPBS.
A federal judge in California has ordered a stop to efforts to wind down the 2020 census. NPR recently reported that some in-person door-to-door operations would end as soon as September 18th. The deadline for the population count is the end of this month, but that's being challenged by civil rights groups, Native American tribes, and local governments. The court order applies nationwide and calls for the Trump administration to end any efforts to end census work prematurely until another hearing set for next week. Local organizations are now sprinting to make sure there's an accurate census count this year. Max Rivlin-Nadler tells us just how important this year's census is to Latino political power in agricultural communities.
Census organizers have been worried about a possible undercount in Latino communities for years. Those worries intensified when the Trump administration announced that in-person counting in San Diego will end September 18th, weeks before it was supposed to. The census determines how much money and how much political representation these communities will have for a decade. Organizers like Paola Araceli Ilescas say a Latino getting counted in 2020 can bring about even more change than casting a single vote. For instance, this year's CARES Act, the pandemic relief funding bill, was allocated based in part on the 2010 census.
I know we talk about time. We tell them, you count yourself this year, you're making sure you count for the next 10 years. You don't count yourself this year, you basically are not receiving or don't exist for these next 10 years. And guess what? We're gonna lose $2,000 each year for each person that doesn't count for the next 10 years.
Ilescas works for the Vista Community Clinic. She organizes agricultural workers from Mexico and Central America who work the avocado orchards. Most of these workers can't vote. Their children, many of whom are U.S. citizens, are still too young to vote. So to participate politically, Ilescas wants them to get counted. But that's not always easy, especially when it comes to undocumented and mixed status families.
Many of them still have said that other people have expressed distrust. Are they really the employees, or are they faking to be the employees in order to get them? Because for years we've been saying, don't open the door to ICE officials, this is your right? And so at this point, now we're saying, open the door.
That transition takes trust between census organizers and the community. But other issues like wildfires and pandemic relief are taking priority. On a recent sweltering day in San Marcos, wildfires threatened rural communities across the state. Arcela Nunez Alvarez, a community organizer, planned on leading a group of volunteers to pass out census literature outside of a low-income housing development. But the volunteers were redirected. A wildfire had just broken out nearby.
We work with a lot of adults. Many have very limited formal education. They've had to work their entire lives, but care about their community.
Nunez Alvarez grew up in San Marcos. She understands the importance of messaging coming from members of the community.
These leaders then, live in apartment complexes like the ones here around us. So they're members of the community. They speak the language of the community. They look like the community that we're trying to reach.
She says that while many community members can't vote, that doesn't mean they don't have a role to play in getting resources to their community.
These are communities that have been politically disengaged or disenfranchised and undercounted, in the census.
In the Imperial Valley, which has been hit hard by the pandemic, census efforts often have to take a back seat to safety. But the stakes couldn't be higher. The low-income agricultural powerhouse needs federal money for cleaner air, broadband access, better health care, and transportation in an area that's frequently cut off from the rest of the region.
The commitment that we make to our community.
Miguel Hernandez is an organizer with Comité Cívico del Valle, which is helping spearhead census efforts in the Imperial Valley. He said that going virtual is not always an option for census organizing.
Having also low broadband connectivity throughout the county makes it even more difficult if you wanted to promote digital, if you wanted to promote using social media platforms.
He's worried that not having that face-to-face interaction during the pandemic has set them back.
Having a direct conversation and, probably sharing a coffee or, unas conchitas, pan dulce or something like that with their neighbors. That's the way our community wants to be approached. That's the way our community feels confident to the information you're giving them actually makes sense to them.
Time is running out for Latino communities, undocumented immigrants and citizens who have just a few more days to make themselves count and a decade to live through the results. Max Adler, KPBS News.
More now on the wildfires burning in California. 2 hours north, the El Dorado fire has forced evacuations in San Bernardino County. CAL FIRE says a pyrotechnic used in a couple's gender reveal party set that off. At this point, no charges have been announced. The fire has burned nearly 8,000 acres in the Yucaipa area near Redlands. It's just about 7% contained. Some evacuations have been ordered. In Northern California, new video shows the intense effort to evacuate people during one of the season's biggest fires. Steve Large has the story.
No, you gotta go now. Let's go. Now.
It's right behind your house.
You don't have time to carry your stuff. Let's go.
This police body camera video shows a new view of an intense escape.
Come on, come on, come on.
Video shows the officer going door to door, urging Vacaville homeowners to hurry, even helping grab last-second items as he notifies homeowners of a mandatory evacuation order.
Okay, let's go. You gotta go.
All right. The body camera captures the officer loading up a bag in a homeowner's vehicle and hustling onto the next home. Back in the patrol car and onto the next home, the orange glow of the fast-moving flames easily visible. In all, the LNU Lightning Complex fire forced 15,000 people from their homes. Now, this new video shows the heart-pounding effort by a Vacaville police officer to help people to safety.
You have got to go now. Let's go.
And that was Steve Large reporting. Let's get another update on the fire burning in East County. The Valley Fire near Alpine has grown to 10,000 acres in just a couple of days and has forced evacuations. Max Rivlin-Nadler is there live for us tonight. Max, what can you tell us?
Hi, Maya. So the fire, I just want to give an example of how quickly this has been able to spread. When we arrived on the scene this morning on Lyons Valley Road, the fire was on one side of the mountain, of that road, alongside the side of a mountain. Within just minutes, it was able to jump across that road, burn through the entire mountainside, and the area we were in got extremely hot. We saw animals running across the road to try to get out of the way of the fire, and fighters were able to drop some flame retardant on there. They were able to, excavate some areas using earth movers, try to dim down the fire as much as possible. But even because it was moving so fast, they weren't able to do it all in time to basically get themselves out of the way and fight that fire. So eventually they had to leave the area. And ultimately, within around basically 5 minutes, that fire was gone. it had burnt through the area entirely, just showing just how dry this area is and how easy it is for it to burn. Firefighters are trying to use that to their advantage, to use the places that have already burned to try to contain the fire and direct it into an area that it can be contained. Of course, we're still waiting for that update from CAL FIRE at 7 p.m. to let us know how much of the fire is contained and how much acreage has been burned. Earlier today, I did go down Lyons Valley Road to an area. I took a photo, I put it on my Twitter, that had been absolutely scorched by the fire. It was a really desolate scene to take in. We had seen the remnants of a home, of an area where people had been living. Obviously, this hasn't really hit kind of major population centers, but if you're between this fire and where it wants to go, and if your house is in the way, it's going to be very tough for firefighters to stop it. So you see why they're issuing these evacuation orders. Maya?
Max, thank you so much for that report. And here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. Be sure to start your day with KPBS Morning Edition. We'll have all the latest developments on the Valley Fire as crews try to make progress overnight. And then on Midday Edition, the issue of veterans struggling with PTSD is well known. Now, new research shows veterans of color are dealing with the problem at higher rates. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Have a great evening.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, proud to support the mission of KPBS and privileged to serve San Diego clients. Anderson Plumbing, Heating and Air, helping homeowners maintain drain, heating, and cooling systems since 1978. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley. And by the following: and by viewers like you. Thank you.